I'm Mike Sheridan and you're very welcome to The Delve. Robin Black is one of the most well-respected analysts in not just mixed martial arts but in all of sports. His intelligent fight breakdowns have garnered millions of views and won him plenty of fans. A former rock star and fighter himself, on Friday, June 22nd, Robin takes his one-man show to Liberty Hall. Robin, thanks so much for coming in. Is this your first time in Dublin?
I was in Dublin about 10 years ago with my rock band when we were on tour.
Cool.
Yeah, and I was talking with John and a couple of my friends hanging out. It's very different than England or Scotland or Wales. Very different. I don't think people in North America know how different, but it's very Canadian, or Canadians are very Irish. There's something like everybody's ultra polite and friendly and generous and stuff, and that's how Canadians like to see ourselves too.
I did years ago. We have this thing in Ireland called a J1 where students get to go to the US or North America and Canada. And I spent the summer in California, and then the following year I spent the summer in Toronto. And the difference: Canadians are insanely polite and just nice. They couldn't help us enough.
It's just natural. Like I get to travel a lot, and you find that cultures are not like we get credit for being polite. And people think when people are less polite that they're somehow rude. It's just you learn what you grew up learning.
Yeah.
You know, in Russia, and I love traveling to Russia. I get to call fights there, and I love going there. And in Russia, people they don't line up in the same kind of way, and there's a bit of pushing, and the strong gets to the front. And the strong gets to the front, and they get what they get. And that's just the culture. They're not rude people. It's just the way it's developed.
Yeah.
And you find that the bluntness of certain other places at first is jarring, but then it becomes refreshing. Like when somebody is going to give you a no bullshit conversation, it's refreshing too. So the different is cool. Like it's not better to be polite, but it's nice.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, people give people a good impression of wherever you're
Yeah.
from. And you mentioned a band there as well. So you're kind of unusual in the sense that now you're one of the top MMA analysts in the world. You were in a band for a long time, and you're 4 and 5 as a fighter.
Yep.
So you fought like 9 times as well. How did those two worlds meet? I know how the analyst thing came in later, but how did the first two worlds meet?
The martial arts was always my thing, like from a little kid. And I know you love training and fighting and martial arts. There's something very special about it. And some people who fall in love with yoga, I think they are seeing a part of it, like the moving of your body and the changing of your body. And then I think some people who fall in love with competitive sports, football, soccer, baseball, whatever, they feel a part of it. But there's something about that thing together. You know, training and changing yourself and understanding yourself, but also pushing yourself and testing yourself and competing. And just from the time I was a kid, that was what I loved the most. Playing in a rock band was really fun because you got a lot of chicks and you got to party all the time. So it isn't that I was a guy in a rock band who later decided to be a martial artist. I was a martial artist who meandered off the path to go on an adventure, getting drunk and chasing girls.
You started out with martial arts and then kind of evolved to being in a band.
You're 18 or 19 years old. And all of your, it's the 80s for me when I was, and all of my heroes have long hair and tattoos and they wear tight spandex pants. And that'll shape you, right? So you're 18, 19, you start playing music with a bunch of friends. It's really fun. You're out late every night. You wear eye makeup and girls find it attractive. And all of a sudden, you lose 10 years of your life traveling around the world writing songs.
Yeah, and it helps to kind of be a tough guy as well to have that martial arts background, just in terms of confidence and just in terms of, I suppose, when you're up on stage, I suppose, for want of a better phrase, you have a bit of balls about you.
Yeah. The strut of being a performer is rooted in confidence, whether that's real or something that you have to build up. When you walk out to fight, you better be confident to fight. Like there are connections to it for sure. And even with what I do now, my job now, I analyze martial arts and I dissect it and I find beauty and lessons in it, and then I share it with people. And that aspect, there are things about doing that job that connect to writing songs and making music videos and making art in that way. And there are things to fighting that connect to performing in a rock band. To me, it all makes sense. It doesn't feel like I've done different things. It just feels like I've kind of meandered within the same thing. I'm just kind of an artist who does weird art.
And kind of talking about being an analyst, how important is it not necessarily to have fought and to have fights under your belt, but to have competed and to train in mixed martial arts to be a kind of a good analyst, I suppose?
I think you just have to do it. And I don't think you can truly, can you really be a war correspondent if you've never been in a war zone? Like, and that is an extreme example. Can you really be, talk about fashion design if you've never made a dress? That's the light example.
Yeah.
And somewhere in between that is fighting in a cage. And you cannot describe, as you're looking at something, you're trying to explain what's happening. If you don't know what it's like to be terrified or hurt or have been jabbed in the face so many times that you can't will yourself to go forward because of the threat of that jabs, if you don't know what it's like to not be able to breathe because your nose is full of blood, if you don't know what that's like, you're missing like 90% of the information you're trying to describe.
It's almost an empathy thing that if you're doing commentary on a fight, you know what it feels like to be there, you know what it feels like to take a shot like that or to be in a position, an uncomfortable position like that with somebody with top or something.
When I was talking to Michael Bisping last week, and he was like, he liked this concept that was that you have to lose to be a good analyst. You don't just have to fight. You have to lose. You have to know what it's like to train for months of your life, push yourself, put everything on hold, only eat what you're supposed to eat, sleep when you have to sleep, say no to birthday parties and all of these things and your wife's, work party and all of these things and go through all of that, and then fail in front of everybody in your underpants all by yourself, and then wake up the next morning and cry. You have to fucking do that, or else you cannot. When you go and you're describing something and you are critical of somebody who's out there fighting in this extreme environment, you just don't have the information necessary to do that.
I think there's an inherent selfishness with being an elite athlete. So you look at LeBron James, you look at Tom Brady, you look at whoever, and the selfishness that they have to compete at that level, especially with somebody like Brady getting older. Then you look at fighters, and that takes it to a different level because you have to get in a cage. Literally, the cage is going to close, and you're going to compete with somebody. So I think, and another point with that is MMA fanboys, the comment sections of any MMA article, McLeod, wherever it be, just to me, they're the worst places on earth, precisely because of that reason. But that selfishness is almost layered because you really have to be number one yourself.
And you have an excuse for anything. If you have a fight booked, you have an excuse for anything. Somebody wants you to do something or needs you to do something, or you have to be a better husband or a better father or a better friend to somebody. You can say, look, I have a violent confrontation with a professional athlete in 14 days. I'm sorry, I can't fucking do that right now. Like, you have an excuse for everything. Everything is about you. And that is one of the beauties of it when you're training to fight, but it's one of the reasons when you see the best friend and the wife and the husband of these people, you see how hard it is. I mean, when you have that excuse that, no, I can't do the dishes right now. Can't you see I have to rest because I have a violent confrontation with a professional athlete in 13 days from now and 11 hours, and it's very selfish. It really is, which is one of the things that is so pure about it, but it's also one of the reasons that you can't do it forever.
Yeah.
You can't fight forever. But it is all of these things that make it so special. It's all of these unique aspects when you're getting two human beings. We have a tendency to kind of just gloss it over. How were the fights last? Oh, it was crazy. There was a lot of finishes. Oh, yeah? What happened? Oh, McGregor won. Who do you think is going to fight next? And all of a sudden, we're in the future. It's like, no, this mind-blowing moments took place that people have dedicated entire lifetimes, and their coaches have learned through the minds of geniuses down for many generations to pass this on, to train in this situation for two people to come together in combat that represents the history of humanity in that moment. Yeah. And we're like, yeah, what's next for him? It's like something very special and unique happened. And that is a big part of how I see my job, is to make sure that people understand how special that moment is, because the nature of television and the nature of sport and the nature of the internet and business and all of these things has tended to worry a lot about all of the mechanisms around a fight and forget about two geniuses of combat right there for our entertainment.
Did that come with popularity in the UFC exploding, obviously on a global scale? And it's, there is an element of entertainment to it now. We see that with Kobe Covington. Yeah. And it was, he's just doing a McGregor, but Sonnen was doing that years ago as well. Yeah. So is there an element there of entertainment kind of glossing over what these two human beings are doing in the cage?
Yes. And I have different amounts of conflict. So I work for many different companies around the world, making my breakdown videos and analysis and doing commentary, and I love it. But the UFC is the biggest, and it's and a part of my show in Dublin tomorrow night, part of the story of my storytelling is talking about my goal to commentate the UFC. So that's what I've always wanted to do, and that's still what I want to do. But I have a lot of conflict with that company, and even when I work for them, because they've spent so much time talking about rankings and belt systems and weight divisions and conflict and Twitter beefs and all of these things, and spent so little time talking about the actual artistry that's happening there. And now you see that there are, as the conflicts become bigger and bigger and the Twitter beefs are bigger and the Colby Covingtons of the world and all of controversy, conflict, Conor McGregor throwing things through, all of that is what we focus on. So much so that we forget to look and go, I mean, my God, that's beautiful, or it's incredible what they're doing. People who follow, dance or art or music are curious about the art form, and they're shared the art form, and they're taught about the art form. They don't have to just obsess around all the things around it. But that's part of what has happened through the speed with which the UFC became large.
Do you notice a common theme amongst, I suppose, professional fighters? Because I'm asked this all the time. And, it's still a very young sport. MMA is still a very young sport. It was 92, 93, really, when it kind of started going out there. And what I tell people is, for the most part, fighters are kind of sensitive guys. And obviously now the female fighters are absolutely flying too. But they're kind of sensitive guys. And the majority of the guys I would train with, and they'll kill me for saying this, they're kind of nerdy, kind of geeky guys that just, commit 100% to something and end up being, super tough guys.
The best fighters, the best combat athletes are nerds. Always. They are. The tough guys, the cocky, arrogant tough guy, they don't do very well, because to get better, you must study your weaknesses. You have to look and go, okay, I'm not very good at this. Oh, I get caught that way. If somebody gets on my back and chokes me all the time, the only way I'll get better at that is getting someone on my back choking me all the time. So you have to have this low level of ego that has to be trained down low enough to do that, and a high level of obsession and nerdiness to where you're just so deeply curious. You and I would train jiu-jitsu, and we would be talking about how when we went to do something, where we would put the elbow for the best leverage. That's some nerdy shit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But that's what's necessary to become really good. So the best fighters are really pretty nerdy.
And they're different brains as well, because we were talking about Joe Rogan. I want to talk about Joe. You've done his podcast a bunch, and I know he's a friend of yours. And I spoke to him there a couple of years ago, and I was saying, John Kavanagh, was SPG head coach, and he's an engineer by trade, so he's got this mathematical brain and able for repetition and stuff. And I was like, do you think that's better for jiu-jitsu? And Rogan said, well, it is in a way, but then Eddie Bravo's kind of out there,
scatterbrained, exactly.
And it's creative. It's a different thing altogether.
See, now we're getting into what I love about it. It's it's an expression of self. Fighting is the purest expression of self. If you get painters, some of them paint in large strokes, some of them throw paint at stuff. There are scientific painters, there are artistic painters, there are random painters. Fighting's just like that. And you'll end up expressing fighting the way that you really are. And then in other ways, the way maybe you'd like to see yourself. Michael Page is somebody, and even if people don't watch Bellator, tens of millions of people have watched
Casuals.
Yes, tens of millions of people who casually consume fighting have seen him do mind-blowing things on Twitter or Instagram, whether they know his name or not. But you talk to him and he's very quiet. He's very he doesn't have a big personality, but when he's out there in the cage, that's an aspect of how he expresses himself. He's flashy and he's risky. And
we even saw him do that, like a karate stance in a boxing fight there last week, and knock a guy out with a right hand.
Yeah, which, in theory, you can't do. Well, he did it, you know, and that's a lot of any kind of art, but especially a newer art form. All of these things that apparently you must do or you can't do, that's nonsense. We haven't figured out what we can and can't do. It'll take 100 years more. So, things that you say, if you tell me I can't do a karate punch in a boxing match, what you believe is, this is so pointless, no one should do it. And since you believe no one should do it, none of your training partners do it. So when I do it, you've never seen it.
Do you think, okay, let's talk about Rogan and McGregor and stuff for a second. Conor didn't have a huge amount of time to train for the Mayweather fight. Obviously, we're talking the best boxer of all time. That's been covered a million times before. How different do you think that fight would have been, or would it have been different if Conor had a year to train for that? Because I know
There's-
Rogan has
there's-
mentioned this before.
yes.
He's talked about this before.
I don't think so. I think we saw one, you get one time. So it is a sample size of one. If we got 10 times, could he have won one of those? I say yes. I say that exactly what he was on that night, there was the potential to win. I think if you teach him, and yes, if you trained specifically for Floyd Mayweather for a year, but if you trained typical boxing, if you trained traditional boxing, he wouldn't have got better. Conor McGregor had a better chance to beat Floyd. Let's say Conor McGregor is the 1,900th best boxer in the world. He had a better chance to beat Floyd Mayweather than the 7th best boxer in the world.
That's a great way of putting it.
Because he's very different.
Yeah.
And that's still true whether he won or lost.
And Floyd really didn't know what he was getting into. And then, what were you thinking when you saw, and again, I know this is kind of old news, but I'm just fascinated to know what you think when you saw that, like, the Paulie footage kind of and Conor dropping Paulie, and did he drop, did he fall?
I saw that footage. They sent me that footage.
Really?
So I was so Dana asked me to do a breakdown of how Conor could win, because he knew that I knew he could win. Now, we know history says he did not win. Irrelevant to the fact that he could win, or could have won, or could win in another situation of the same. That is true. That's still true to this day. Dana knew that I knew that and believed that fully, and I had done a little breakdown literally in my bedroom in front of a wall, just talking about seeing the footage. And somehow, whether it was the timing or the nature of how these things work, about 200,000 people watched me do that little 15-minute, and one of those was Dana White. And Dana White, somebody at the UFC reached out to me and said, Dana wants to fly you to Vegas to shoot a clip for ESPN on a How Conor Could Win special. So he brought me down to do that. And I asked if I could see the Paulie footage because I wanted to use that. Part of my description was, he's very different. You can't beat the best boxer in the world if you're the 30th best boxer, but being a weird 1,900th best boxer, but very different, it's possible. They liked that theory, and then I said, and I want to say recent footage showing McGregor fighting high-level boxers show that this is possible. And they said, okay, we like it. Yeah, and they sent me the footage. And so I saw it all. And he beat up Paulie, and Paulie's my friend.
Yeah.
Paulie is a good friend. I like him very, very much. I admire him as a boxer, as a man, as a commentator. But Conor beat him up, and that's real. He did that. Now, there are always other little aspects to anything. That happened in that moment. Paulie had just flown 4 or 5 hours, did just come directly from there, was in a new environment. There was a lot of things that were in McGregor's favor, but those things are always true in every fight. You know, sometimes you have psychological advantages, sometimes you have situational advantages. So, but he beat up a very high-level boxer.
It really just added to the hype too, because like we've never seen anything really like this before. Like the Manny Pacquiao fight was, I mean, everybody said it was a few years too late, you know, to be a super competitive fight.
When I was watching that fight, in those first 3 rounds, everything I believed was true. Conor could get to him. He was different. He was bigger and stronger. He was going to be able to.
Do you think people forget that?
Yes. 100%.
People forget those first few
100%.
rounds.
We have and this is a part of the fun of doing work like this, and certainly my analysis, is seeing how humans behave, like how we consume things and share things and think about things. The truth is, we are so obsessed with outcome in our society and results that we forget about process. But the very best of anything in the world, whether you're the best runner or banker or scientist or whatever, it's all about process. So if you want to study anything to get better at anything or learn how to live your life, it's about studying process. But something about and I think sport is a part of it. We human beings are obsessed with the results. Who won the game? You know, who's the new president? Like, not if you want to, and politics is a whole other world. But if you want to study what's going on in the world, you don't say, oh, look, Trump is the president. You say, how did he become the president? What happened there? How did that take place? What were people thinking? Why were they thinking that? And that's what analysis is. And by studying martial arts with my life, it's helped me study most things that way. And we're obsessed with results. And we don't pay the true honor that process deserves. And if you watched if you were from planet Mars and you only I showed you the first 3 rounds of McGregor versus Mayweather and you didn't know anything, I'd say, who won? You'd be like, I think that tall Irish guy won that. You know?
Yeah.
That is true. Now, but it's also true that he not only lost the fight, was finished, and couldn't do 10 or 12 rounds. It just wasn't going to be possible.
Yeah.
Yes, and you know, no matter how, and this was a very large gaping hole when I was, and anybody else that took the same view and looked at it from the same perspective. If you get past about 6 or 7 rounds, it doesn't matter how strong your right hand is or how different you are or how differently you view fighting or the fact that you learned, and there are so many things, but if you learned about fighting as a mixed martial artist, you understand fighting with 2 fists differently than a boxer. Not better, not worse, very differently. And that was all those things were true. But there's a reason that you'd have, if you were a boxer, you'd have 10 4-round fights and then 10 6-round fights and then some 8s and then some 10s, because that's what's necessary to make you capable of that. And no matter how McGregor, Owen Roddy, John Kavanagh, all these brilliant people, no matter how they prepped him, they couldn't change that physiological truth.
Yeah.
That to be a 10, 12, or 15-round fighter takes years of physiological preparation to do. So that just wasn't there.
And okay, let's look going forward a little bit now, and you know, and just to kind of continue on that theme of Conor. We don't know whether he's going to fight or not. I suppose you know, again, or how soon, or if we're all. But I suppose the inkling is, I think, from both of us, it'll probably be in a few months.
Yeah. The aspects of how and why and how these fights take place has so little to do with martial arts and so much to do with manipulation of people, media, metrics, likes, clicks, shares, all that kind of shit. And McGregor understands it very well. I mean, you cannot, if we took 10,000 of the smartest boxing minds and we said, how would you go when you get a fighter to get a $10 million fight with Floyd Mayweather? They'd say, well, we got to get to 10-0, and then we got to fight a guy of this level, and then we need to get him in with Oscar to manage by these people, and then after about 5 years, we'll build him up to the point that we'll try to get. No, McGregor went on Twitter. You know what I mean? McGregor went on fucking Twitter. That's how he did it. And we talked about politics. How and why are the people that are in office today? Because they're using the way that communication is used in the modern era. McGregor is a brilliant fighter. That is an undeniable truth. He and the people around him are also brilliant at manipulating media. And you add to it that he's also wildly entertaining, funny, interesting, clever, all of those things, and you put it together, and if and when he wants to fight, he will use all of those tools and he'll fight.
It's a don't give a shit attitude too, of like, well, I don't really care what kind of people think. I'm going to get rich.
But that's it. Or get what I want, whatever your goal is. And it's something you can either admire or dislike, but it's irrelevant. These are human beings. There's plenty of them. This is how our world works. If you want something bad enough, number one, you must be very, very, very good, exceptionally good, and then you must go out and get the audience to say, we want them to do this. Yeah. And he can do that. So it doesn't matter what we think about lawsuits, or if we like Khabib Nurmagomedov, who he'll fight, or we hate him, or if you think he deserves it, or Dana's, but none of that's relevant. What's relevant is, can this guy make a scenario that makes all of the people involved a lot of money? And the answer is, yeah, he can do that. So if he wants to fight, he will fight. And if he doesn't, he won't. And that's really it. When you simplify it like that, it's interesting for us, the viewers, but it's also valuable. It's valuable to understand. Like, a lot of us have a lot more control over our lives than we think we do. You know, you just have to go out, figure out the system, figure out how the system works, and figure out how to make it work for you. And McGregor is a perfect example of that. Like him or hate him, he's a perfect example of that.
What fights, or what possible fights in the UFC next 6, 12 months, or even Bellator or any of the high-level organizations excite you the most? You've got DC and Stipe next month. Yeah. That's a fight I'm really looking forward to. That nobody really knows. And that's why the reasons why it's so exciting. Or is it possibly Conor and Khabib? What fights excite you?
Both of those excite me. The truth is, there are very few fights I don't get excited to see, because the more you see about them, the more individual these people become. Again, that's another reason why I want to always go deeper and deeper into studying these things because we have a tendency to go, oh, look, he's a wrestler, and oh, he's a heavyweight. And it's like they're all unique. They're all so individual. But Cormier and Stipe fascinates me for real. The thing that I'm most fascinated by right now is almost that there is another generation. Like if we talk to a 15-year-old right now, they know all these famous people that we have no idea about. Their world is totally different. They consume things differently, they share things differently, and they learn things differently because of the speed with which they gather information. And that's true of 21-year-old fighters too. Like fighters that are 21 and 22 right now, things that took Dan Henderson or George St. Pierre 10 years to learn, these guys will learn it in the first 10, 15
Rory
weeks.
MacDonald was kind of the first one of those guys. Yeah.
He was that new
wave
new
of
wave
actual
of it.
pure mixed martial artists.
Yeah. He's also fascinating because he's also just, my friend Rogan, you mentioned Rogan, he used the term the savage. He is a savage. Like it's not a colloquialism. It's not just a term you use. He's a savage. Like if he was born in a different era, he'd be on a horseback, the first guy out with the sword lopping off heads in the war. Like that's who he is. Other guys are these gentle artists, and other guys are these nerds sort of solving puzzles, which is a violent, competitor. But what I'm fascinated when you see portions of kind of that newer generation face off against a slightly older one, and Stipe is oddly on the very front end of a new type of heavyweight. He moves his feet in ways that heavyweights couldn't move their feet, at least heavyweight mixed martial artists couldn't, only 2 and 3 years ago. But then Cormier, the way to shut that down is get it on somebody's hips and drag them to the ground and beat them up. And he's done that to other heavyweights before. And so that's fascinating. But there are very few fights that don't fascinate me just from the purely watching the level of artistry. I mean, we're watching how human beings can compete in physical conflict. And we're watching it evolve and change week to week, almost day to day. If you go into, I'm going to go to SPG today. And if I go there again in 10 weeks, and you go there all the time, and when you pop in and out, there are people doing things differently and moving differently and understanding the art differently. And that fascinates me, and I think it's relevant to technology, and I think it's relevant to whatever business people are in that's changing. The world changes so fast now.
Yeah. Okay, and I'm not going to keep you much longer. I know you want to go off and train. You've just flown in before the jet lag gets you completely. In terms of Rogan and in terms of where Joe Rogan has evolved to, I say it all the time, and I tweeted it there a few weeks ago, and the tweet went absolutely insane. Joe Rogan's melded this world of digital and broadcasting like nobody else has. I think Ireland and the UK are maybe a couple of years behind it, but I think we'll get there eventually, and we were talking about that off camera. When I spoke to him a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, it was like 13 downloads an episode. Is this a movement, and what's it like to be kind of in the middle of that movement? Because you've done the show a bunch, and you're friends with Joe. I know he recommended you to Dana for the UFC.
Yes, he did. Joe has been an incredible friend, a good friend, and a very generous guy. Like, I had a little conflict with the UFC about the fact that I do my 1-minute breakdowns, and they were concerned about how you use footage. There are tens of thousands of kids sharing UFC and other footage now. It doesn't matter what the sport is. You can't stop that. That's the nature of the internet. And so I had somebody at the UFC was saying, you shouldn't be doing that. And I reached out to Joe, who's a friend, and he's like, that's ridiculous. Joe probably is more pirated by other people because of his clips and things that are shared everywhere. And Joe doesn't care because it's like when Metallica tried to sue file sharing kids. This is just how technology changes. People share these things. You can't control the sharing of information. What Joe has done as a fan and a friend, and when I watch him, literally the only thing he's really done, one is he's brilliant and incredibly open-minded. So you're watching him change. By him having the highest level of conversations with brilliant minds, you're watching him change and grow and get new ideas and understand the world differently.
And be willing to be wrong as well with a lot of the people he's talking
100%. And what you're watching is self-actualization. Joe Rogan is this highly evolved mind, oddball mind, different mind, that is actualizing himself in front of you. So that's fascinating to people. The other thing is he's brutally honest. So why would that even be worth mentioning? Because we'd all grown up watching television where almost everything was bullshit. Like the news that's presented to you is written by somebody, crafted in such a way to be the news. The way that football and baseball and hockey is presented to you is by some producer that's in somebody's ear saying, make sure you disagree with him. It's all nonsense. Politics was presented to you in this speech, in this political way that everybody had to say things in the way that it was bullshit. Through the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, we had a steady diet of lies and bullshit and artificiality on television. So when people like Joe Rogan came along and they smoked pot and they swore and they said crazy things, it was so refreshing. The truth is refreshing and rare and weird when you live in a world where everything you're seeing is crafted and artificially created for you. And Joe Rogan, one, was curious about the world, and so you could, yes, you got a different fascinating person every week or every day. He does probably four a week now, but you also watched him learn. And I think on some level, we all just want to learn more. We all want to understand the world a little bit more. We all want to understand this constantly changing environment that we live in. And I think we can do that by watching Joe Rogan. And he's smart and he's funny. And all of a sudden, I don't think, at least he would tell you, and when you're around him and Jamie and his guys, I don't think they had some big digital plan like Gary Vaynerchuk. Yeah. I think he was just like, let's do cool shit that entertains me. I'll bring my friends in and we'll hang out. And his timing was really good, and he's brilliant. And
it was interesting seeing him and Gary Vee, because it was one of these where they had such a crossover of a fan base that they wanted Gary Vee to be on Rogan's podcast. And, you know, like, not that they clashed by any means, it was a really fascinating podcast, but it was kind of different ideologies kind of coming together, I suppose.
You can wrestle your whole life, and I can do jiu-jitsu, and then we can still brawl. It'll be scrappy and weird, but we'll still be grappling. And that's kind of like those guys. Gary hacked into, and I know Gary a little bit too. In fact, when I was working at a company called Fight Network, which bizarrely cut their entire digital department in 2017, or 2016. Which, when I told that to somebody,
go back to the printing press.
Yeah, exactly. When I tell that to people now, they just are shocked that anybody would cut a digital department in 2016. But and I reached out to Gary, who I didn't really know at the time, because I was now going to, use Twitter and Instagram to share fighting stuff, and YouTube and these things. And he gave me an hour or two with his creative department to give me sort of a little tidbit of info. And so I had a Skype talk with like 6 people from Gary Vaynerchuk's office, because his philosophy is give people stuff. Why not? Give people things. And so if you're lucky, with good fortune and maybe because I was doing well, or I had sent him a breakdown that had hundreds of thousands of views at a time that wasn't common, so maybe it was that, but he just gave me his digital departments to give me a little boost to understand it. So I know him and his people a little bit. They have figured out the hack to how to do what Joe's doing. Joe never used that hack. Joe just did really cool shit. The digital world is self-correcting, and it rewards good. It rewards good. If people like it, you're rewarded for it. People are often like, how do I get more Instagram followers, or how do I get more clicks? Just make better shit.
Yeah, good and consistent, I suppose.
Yeah, good and consistent, exactly. And that's what Joe did. Gary figured out what was happening under the hood. What was the secret sauce in the chili? Joe just made the chili. So in a weird kind of way, they are parallel going, but it's almost like 2 different systems that intertwine. And it's like Joe's playing bass and Gary is playing violin. They're still part of the same orchestra, but they didn't go about it the same way, which is also why, and I'm sure if they spoke again, they would find the interesting ways that their worlds connect.
Yeah, and I want to ask you about the show finally, and about what the show entails. But before I do, I suppose briefly, and it's a difficult one to be brief about, I guess, as well. But if Conor does fight Khabib Nurmagomedov, how would you see that fight going? Because it's a fascinating fight, just from a fundamentally combat point of view.
I think so. I've thought about this a lot lately, and not just that fight, but this conversation, because it happens all the time. And people sometimes it shortens even more to, who's your pick, right? But to me, the question is, who would win a fight like this? It's a very, very hard question. But a very easy heuristic of that question is, who do you like better? And that's what most people answer in this situation. Somebody's like, I like Khabib, and their answer will be, Khabib will get him down, he'll grab that, control that wrist, sit on that hip, and pound that Irish motherfucker until he's done. And it's like, you actually don't have almost any information other than you watch fighting a little bit, and you've seen Khabib fight like that, and you like him. Then, I'm in Ireland, so we will in Ireland, and Conor, I'm a fan of both of those two guys, but we will say, are you crazy? Did you see what he did to Eddie Alvarez? Or Jose Aldo, he'll bounce out there. When Khabib tries to close the distance, he'll drill him with the left hand, a Celtic cross, put him to sleep, flim flam, etc. And what you're really saying is, I like Conor McGregor, and I know he does that sometimes. And the truth is somewhere where those two things meet. The truth of the matter is, you as a martial artist and a fight fan, and if you remove the fact that you're Irish, which is, I see, impossible, which I clearly know, because I've been here only a day, but this is one of the coolest places you'll ever be. And it isn't illogical that people would be proudly Irish, because this is a very, very, very special place. Yeah. But, so you cannot remove that. But if you could, as a martial artist, you look at it and say, and I say to you, could you see Khabib not being able to get a hold of Conor at all as Conor controls the distance, slides back, and as he fades away, drilling him with that left hand over and over again and finishing him in the first or second? And the answer is 100% I can see that. And then if I said to you, could you see, though, being surprised as Khabib somehow just ferociously fights his way through that, gets a hold of him, drags him to the ground, beats him up for 4.5 minutes, and Conor's hurt at the end of round 1, and if it happens again in round 2, we don't think Conor's going to win the fight? I could see that. I could see that. And what's more likely to happen?
Who knows?
Who knows?
Yeah.
And we were talking about television. When I work in television, someone in my ear, or I'll get a talking to from the producer after, say, no, you have to make a pick. And you'll say, well, why? And they'll say, because the audience likes the conflict, and they like the debate, and they like the argument. It's like, but the more I learn about fighting, I know that there's no way to know that. Yeah. I know. It's also, that's a wonderful thing, because now we have to watch it. I have to see these two geniuses fight. But if I choose a side and you choose the other and we fight and cut, the producer come out, great job, guys, great job. Oh, I love the conflict there. Yeah, and the way you like, and it is that reason, from seeing that happen on CNN and NBC and Sky and wherever, that's why we argue all the time. That's why our cultures argue. We learned it on television. We learned it watching people do that. Me saying Khabib will take him down and kill him, and you saying, no, Conor will just beat him up at range. Teaching the audience to watch that and think that's normal is why people argue all the time now.
Having kind of some insight into the SBG, I suppose, gym and mindset, and talking to John. I've done a bunch of events with John, and I train my own. And the one thing that they say is, remember the RDA fight when that was going to happen a couple of years ago, it became the first Nate Diaz fight. And I remember Owen was just so confident and so like just kind of effortless about that confidence. And he was saying, look, and John had said the same thing, that we're in a unique position in that we stand behind Conor McGregor and see him.
Yes.
And we see his opponent's face after he lands the first shot. Yeah. And none of them seem to expect it, despite, you know, all of these knockouts and all these first and second round knockouts over the years. But I want to ask you about the show before you go. So you're doing a show in Liberty Hall.
Yeah.
This is a show you've travelled around and done before. What can people expect in the show? I know you've got John Kavanagh coming up tomorrow night.
Yes, there is so it's about a 45-minute storytelling show. And after I do a interview portion of it, and I've got John Kavanagh, and I'm super excited. And you're right, when they stand there and see the guy's face, they also see, I mean, at that time, I would have been shocked if RDA was able to even close the distance and get to Conor. And I was a little shocked that Eddie couldn't do it at all. And it was brilliant. That was one of the most beautiful, and I'm a big Eddie Alvarez fan. That was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. And I've sat down and talked with John Kavanagh. I had a beer. He didn't. He doesn't have beer till after the fight. But he had a tea, and we talked about McGregor, Mayweather. And he's just such a brilliant mind. And it's not just martial arts, but the way he sees the world. Because to understand something to that level, it transfers to all things. You know, a brilliant coach like him, he can see how and why, you know, they are able to accomplish certain things. Well, he can apply that to being a father, or he can apply that to being a friend or anything. So it's brilliant to have him. But the storytelling part of it, I want to make people laugh, but more importantly than that, I want to kind of share ideas and lessons that I've learned from adventures, singing in a rock band and fighting in a cage and traveling the world to commentate martial arts and studying brilliant fighters and athletes. Lessons that I've learned that people can gather without having to get kicked in the head or have their stomach pumped or whatever I went through, right? And so it's 4 stories, each one that kind of leads into the next one. And they're funny, I hope. People have tended to laugh a fair bit. But I'm hoping it's more of a I don't like the term motivational speaking because that sounds like Tony Robbins and that's weird. But inspiring or give you ideas about how to maybe see the world a slightly different way. But a lot of people end up laughing because stories about getting knocked out with the first punch that you took and then waking up in the middle of the fight, or getting drunk with sumo wrestlers in Russia. These are fun. These are pretty funny stories.
Well, I'm really looking forward to the show. I'm heading along tomorrow night as well. I can't wait. Robin Black.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
You.
Thanks a mil.